Don't know if I need to use this, but whoa, it's loud. Oh, okay. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Maybe a few people are wandering, I hope. So good morning. Why don't we start with a prayer? Bow your heads. Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for all the beauty and love you've given us. I ask that you help open our eyes to discern your call for each of us. Amen. So today's class is going to be taught by Dan Latham, who is a good friend, and actually Dan and I first met probably 15, 16 years ago at the Peachtree Road Farmers Market. So, that's a great way to, if you want to love and be loved, start going to a farmer's market every week, and you will build great relationships. But we've since gone on and done business together. We've watched each other's children grow up, and our wives are friends. And anyhow, so this is a little bio on Dan. Dan's culinary journey ignited in a rustic back shed of his grandparents' home, where an array of canned and cured delights was stored. Post-graduation from Ole Miss, Dan embarked on a career in the metals industry in New Orleans, deepening his passion for all things Epicurean. In 1998, a pivotal move to New York brought Dan into the orbit of his first mentor, the renowned Mario Batali. Bonding over discussions about airplanes and salami, the friendship blossomed, leading Dan to an inaugural culinary role as a prep chef at Batali's Po in the West Village. The collaboration extended to the launch of a Samolera in Studio del Gusto at Italian Wine and Merchants, where Dan was not only managed day-to-day operations, but also conducted cooking classes and oversaw the charcuterie program. Concurrently, he lent his skills to the Food Network, contributing to some of the network's most prominent programs. In 2003, Dan, alongside his wife Meredith, departed Manhattan to establish their culinary footprint in Oxford, Mississippi. The result was L&M Kitchen in Samolera, a cherished establishment blending Southern American and Italian cuisines. Gourmet Magazine recognized L&M Kitchen as one of, quote, the best farm-to-table restaurants in the South, unquote. Within 2 years, while Dan earned, Within 2 years, Dan earned the James Beard Foundation nomination for Best Chef in the South. After 5 years of running L&M, Dan and Meredith sought new horizons in Atlanta, Georgia, where Dan conceptualized and brought to life what is now the Culinary Guide Shop. He's also an expert fly fisherman, so that's the connection there. So take it away, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, setting up this series and to allowing me to come talk to you guys about my faith journey and my journey within food and how it's all connected. When John called me about this, and we'll go into the background a little bit on kind of the history of my food world, but when John called me on this, it was really hard to kind of like gather all the information that's available in my mind and try to figure out how to articulate this best to you guys, because it's a very passionate subject to me in the sense of what are we doing with our food system. Last week, I don't know how many were here, but John really detailed nicely a way to kind of look at regenerative agriculture and how to steward ourselves within in a consumer in the consumer world best. And I think that was we saw a couple of videos from White Oak Pastures, which is down in South Georgia, one called 100,000 Beating Hearts, which if you didn't see, I would recommend checking that out. And it really kind of articulates this transition from industrial food systems into regenerative practices. And I've really been working on that for the last 15 years and trying to really understand it and how it relates to my life as a chef and as a restaurateur, and now as a restaurant hospitality consultant, and how that directs, and then interweave faith, and my faith journey into this is also a big part of that. We're going to get to this, but I want to really start, and this is, if you're squeamish at all, the next video might be a little bit difficult, but I want to frame this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things came to be through him, and without him nothing came to be. What came through him was life, and this is what I describe as the Logos or the Logos, the natural order of the universe. I fully believe we're in the midst of one of the greatest spiritual wars that we've ever seen in our lifetimes, and probably in the history of things. All masked in entertainment and lust and passions and materialism and consumerism and inverted morality. Vice is virtue, virtue is vice. What does that have to do with food? Well, again, all this information that comes to me is, it's hard to articulate and decipher, and especially into a layman's world. But I called one of my favorite people in the world, and we're going to get to this as well, but a guy named Nate Stuckey, who's the director of the Farminary at Princeton Theological Seminary. And I said, Nate, I need some help. I've got a talk coming up that, I really don't want to scare the children. I really want to inform and try to, distill everything that I see and that I know into a way that's helpful, and the way that's encouraging, not scary. So I, really took Nate's path, and Nate said, look at the first commandment, and basically, let there be no false gods in front of me. And the God of capital and convenience and price and is all at play here. And so with that, I want to show you this video. It's called Dominion, and it's a book, but it's also a video. Again, this is from a group out of Australia that really wants to show that our dominion over animals is not to control and destroy, it's to steward. And John, you talked about stewardship of this last week. And again, this is a look at industrialization of the food system. sent me the itinerary. I looked at Williams Hall, and my mother's side of the family is a Williams, so I was like, I was kind of spurred back to growing up on it. My uncle's a cattle rancher, and I was spurred back to summers on that ranch in the early years of, I would go out and we would round up cattle, and part of my job in summer would be to dehorn and to castrate bulls. And if you've never really been involved in that, that's not something you really want to do. But it really informed my young life as to this. I don't know. I kind of blocked it out when I was young, but it didn't have the connection between what was going on there and then the global food system at all. And as my life developed, I started to kind of understand more of that. My interest in the food business early on was more about making people happy, the entertainment side of things, the hospitality of nature. I really like to serve people. I'm fascinated by the ingredients. I'm an outdoorsman. John mentioned that about fishing. I'm a huge outdoorsman in the sense of I've always been in nature. I grew up in Mississippi in the rural kind of setting, and I think it's all kind of directed my point here. But I didn't know anything about this, and as I've grown through my career, I started to really focus on what's going on in our system and what's happening with our ingredient bank and what's happening with our health. And I really early on was introduced to, John mentioned I was a salami maker. That's kind of this crazy sidebar, but when I was working in New York, I was introduced to some Italians out of a place called Udine, north of Trieste, and there's these master butchers. And the one thing that came forward was their sourcing and the integrity of ingredients. And so I started to learn. This was probably back in my late 20s, early 30s, that I started to kind of understand this connection between what we're doing. And they wouldn't touch anything commodity in the United States. And so I started to kind of be like, we had to source the animals from local farms, and only to get the right fat contents and things of this way. So I started to kind of really understand these connections to purity of ingredient and sourcing, and that started to kind of really spark more of an interest in supply chain and understanding what was going on. So as I started to develop more and more, this type of behavior, this started to come more and more clear to me that the majority of our supply chain is owned by very few corporations, and that's not a bad thing. I think this is a modern day world, a modern day look at what we're dealing with, but it has nothing to do with purity of ingredient or of sourcing or local, and it has really everything to do with what we're dealing with now is what I call a synthetic nature. There's a book called The Dorito Effect that really opened my eyes to what is happening with us in the sense of our health and our connection to food. And the Dorito Effect goes into, it's a story about the Frito-Lay company. It's an executive who, they had the Taco Dorito, which was their first product, and they really, they were happy with it, but they thought it could be better. So this guy formulated 6 ingredients that became the original Taco Dorito, and they thought he was crazy. They didn't really like it, but they were able to produce it and sell it, and it became a wildly successful product. It's been a huge deal for Frito-Lay. But what he uncovered, the author uncovered, was that flavoring components are synthetics, and this was the beginning of the separation from humans from the plant world. And so it goes on to discuss. There's a story about the McCormick company that the majority of the vanilla in the world was coming out of Madagascar at the time in the 60s, and there was a civil war, and they weren't able to get any more vanilla. So they had a scientist that created, I don't remember the name of the machine, but the Spectrometer 4000, and they synthetically matched up to 2,000 ingredients at the time from nature. And so they were able to really jumpstart this component of chemically matching nature's ingredients. So take truffle oil, for example. There's absolutely the majority of truffle oil, there's absolutely no truffle in truffle oil. it's a synthetic compound that gives you the flavor component, gives you the sensory component. And that, in general, started to kind of be like this opening. If you think about one of our favorite companies in the world, and hopefully nobody here is an executive of this company, Chick-fil-A, they would, I'm not saying there are any nefarious things going on, but if you think about the trigger effects of that smell, right? So what we're dealing with are behavioral changes in how food is formulated, how food is delivered to the populace, in the sense of it's like the way tobacco was formulated, right? I'm not saying big food and big tobacco are the same, but I am in a little bit. The formulations of products and synthetics in order to drive consumer behavior or triggers are very concerning to me. And I think this is what this represents, is that we have a monster on our hands in the sense of what we're dealing with. Consumerism has become a big deal. I think what we have to understand is how far do we take it before we can stand up. My discussions with Nate Stuckey from the Farm area really helped me understand a way to frame it, that it was our faith gives us courage to call out these problems and to really start to how do we really think about them, and how do we face them. So I want to show you that little video from Nate, which is a much more uplifting perspective, and which will lead more into discussion of the faith. So the farm area, if no one knows, is a 20-acre property that was given to Princeton Theological Seminary probably about 15 years ago as a gift. They did some research on it and figured out it was an old sod farm. And Nate Stuckey's a Mennonite farmer from Kansas that became a theologian and a professor at Princeton Theological, and decided, this was always his dream, in order to create a program that could help people, connect people back to the land.
Over the course of our years here, I think the farm has been posing some challenging questions to us. What does it look like to have a relationship with the world that moves more towards restoration and renewal than extraction and exploitation? And what if the church was known for that? Those are the kinds of questions we want to wrestle with. What does it mean that we say that God is the creator of the heavens and the earth? There is new insight that emerges. It becomes, like I said, three-dimensional. It becomes tangible. It becomes multisensory. I think the graduates of this program could go in 1,000 different directions. I mean, everything from the nonprofit sector to the corporate sector to churches to universities and colleges that are looking for people with an ecological sensibility in an effort to be attentive to those things. I love working with students in this space and working with other faculty and community members because I think it helps us be more human.
So Nate is a mentor and someone that I'll give a little bit of a story about. He invited me, let's say 2018, to come do a harvest dinner at the farming area, and it was for a group of youth. It was a youth group out of Dallas that came up, and it was probably 15, 16 people, young kids, and they spent a few days working in the garden and really working to, they were doing harvest and doing composting and weeding and things of this nature, and then they picked all the vegetables that they wanted to prepare for that week. We were going to do at the end of the 3 days there was going to be a dinner. So they picked all the vegetables, we cleaned all the vegetables, we prepped all the vegetables, we had some local chickens, and so we had this, at the end of it all, and then I instructed all the cooking, and we all cooked together, and we had this really amazing moment of understanding what went into this, and the labor and the connection to the land and the connection to the soil. A lot of these kids had never really ever had anyone coach them or ever seen where food grows, and so it was a pretty moving moment in my life, in the sense of really understanding that what we're dealing with is a much greater spiritual issue here. And I went deep at that point and trying to reconcile everything I've shown you a little bit. I know it's kind of been scattered, but there's so much information that I take in, that I really try to work on. And this faith in food and farms, and how do we really, how does this evolve, and how does this direct my decisions day to day, my business, and how I work with my children, how I work with my friends, and how I work with my family is, it's not easy. It goes against a lot of mainstreams in the sense of how, a lot of it can seem conspiratorial, a lot of it can seem, really kind of out radical or whatever, and I'm challenged with that a lot, because I think that courage from our faith should allow us to speak up and to be vocal about this and really make a point against the things that I see. I don't want to be I'm not an anti-capitalist. I'm actually I'm very much about free markets, as long as they're allowed to be free, but I don't think they're allowed to be free. I think what we're seeing here is this corporation. We're seeing this blending of corporate and state. We're seeing a blending of how the FDA protects the corporations versus protecting consumers. We're seeing so much of this unfold right in front of us. We're seeing obesity being the number one killer besides smoking that's preventable. I'm a very much of a romantic in many, many ways. I mean, obviously that's been my career in the sense of its food and its wine and its travel and these really amazing places. But as what I was saying, as the state and corporate world become one, and we have this, what I believe to be a managerial for the managerial class for the oligarchy, then things start to go wrong, and they go fast. Nate was talking about our gift of faith is to be courageous and stand for what is right and what is just in the world, right? But when you're demonized or when you're guilted into not saying things or being a proponent for something because it could be against the mainstream narrative, I think that's where we're called to change and to be the stewards of our lives and of these resources. So, Nate and I talked a lot more about this, and we talked about this false gods and what we're really facing, and it's one of them became the god of capital, and Nate talks about this a little bit, and efficiencies, and I don't want capital to be a bad word at all, and I don't want efficiencies to be, but was that dinner with those children efficient? No, right, at all. Everybody had to put in a lot of work for that, but I think that's what we're missing in so much of our lives, in the sense of, I went back and thought about the line in our Lord's Prayer, our daily bread, and what used to go into the daily bread, right? The production of it, the milling of grain, the sourcing of the grain, the stewardship of the land in order for the grain to be right. Like, all of these components are necessary for that daily bread, and if we don't have that, then we're too much involved with these guys, in the sense of that matrix I was showing you, and you're not able to control. John brought this up last week, in the sense of controlling. There's always like, okay, what can you do? What can we do? What is the solutions? These things that come forward, and one of them is to know your sourcing, cook at home more, have conversations with your children, your families, about where things are coming from. What are you doing with your nutrition? What are you doing with your money? Does it stay in the state? Does it stay regionally? Does it go globally? I think that there's this argument that within our country of there's no blaming here. Like, I think for 50 years we've been trying to understand what happened with our health, and I think about the pyramid the food pyramid that came from that we've been programmed to follow for so long, that we always blame a fat or a carb or sugar, or it's wheat, or it's high fructose corn syrup, or whatever it is, but no one's willing to say, hey, what about the formulations of this flavor, these components that we talked about? That goes to the Dorito effect we were talking about. I think that it's really complex in the sense of how you battle this matrix, and with synthetics, they're high, they're so profitable. I think that's the really big thing that you have to kind of understand is that I struggle sometimes with saying there's a nefarious group behind all of this in the sense of driving. I really see the connection between big food, big ag, big pharma, kind of in a circular economy, and it troubles me a lot in the sense that there's a pill to fix every type of ailment. Instead of us really looking at the core of what we do as consumers and what we demand as consumers, and again, that's a conspiratorial kind of look at things, and I don't want that to be the way, but it's hard for me not to see it in the sense that there is this circular economy that basically everybody cleans up everybody's mess, but it's a super highly profitable position for these guys, so it's hard to stop. Small farms are challenged, are super challenged all the time with labor, with cost, inputs. I mean, it's virtually impossible. But I think in order for this system to get better, it's going to get worse. I think looking at that film, Dominion, in the beginning, as a young chef, I wanted to know the sourcing. And so I went through I've seen it all. I've seen the big slaughterhouses. I've been on the floor with processing facilities that kill 7,000 animals a day, those types of things, like guys in chest waders and pools of blood that, it's not sustainable. I'm telling you, like you saw the campuses of these facilities and the water treatment, the human capital, all of these things are, and they're all to feed the world, right? It's for public safety or to feed the world. How are we going to feed everybody? How are we going to do this? Those are the narratives that are spun. But those systems are not sustainable, whether or not they make it through our lifetime or not. I don't know if it's 20 years, 50 years, but those systems won't be here in 100 years. And so there's a lot of pain that's coming to the population to change their behavior and their consumer behavior in the sense of being able to reimagine how we do this. And part of this is relocalizing our decisions, thinking about it. And I'm actually talking about you break it all apart to make food much more accessible and just. I think if you think about America before World War II and a much more agrarian world and much more agrarian societies that had connections to communities, food was available. Local food wasn't expensive, it was available, and it should continue to we should shift that way. That's going to be very challenging for this population and for this group, but meaning us. And but I think one of the ways out and one of the ways to sustain humanity. I think that this relocalization is happening in small groups in certain places, but the challenges of local farms and distribution has really been pushed out. The scalability, the profitability, all of this doesn't allow it to happen super at scale, so it becomes an elite type of operation, and only this food is available to this socioeconomic group here, whereas the rest is, I think if you think about other countries, most of the lower income groups are pretty well fed in the sense of the sustenance, the sustainable nature of just grains and beans and breads and these things. They're not adulterated with all of the synthetics that we have. I think in our country, I know for sure there's 35 different ingredients in Europe that are banned that are allowed in our food system here. And that's another question to ask. And I think that's the question you asked, that matrix that's there. But again, I don't want to put a dark spin on this, but I also want there to be this understanding that it's super complex in what we're dealing with. And I think, to kind of get back to how my faith has directed my decisions in my business, and what we do is we're restaurant and hotel consultants. We help people organize food data. We help them with cost of goods. So we really we're a tool that helps operators and owners and big hotel groups become profitable, and also how do they deal with their supply chain? How do they provide better ingredients for their guests? How do they get out of the seed oil business? How do they get out of these businesses? But also maintaining profitability. This has been work for the last 4 or 5 years in the sense of we don't really tell our customers to promote these things, but when you remove, let's say, seed oils from your menu, your clientele over time become better. They become well. They leave your establishment feeling very good, or they go home and they don't have stomach issues, or they don't have, the seed oils are very inflammatory, so they're not inflamed, or whatever it might be. This interaction with the food systems, and so like a seed oil, like a highly processed soybean oil or sunflower oil or safflower oil. These are highly processed byproducts of our industrial food system that are super inflammatory to most humans, and we don't process them very well. It's like the synthetics we've been talking about. We're not geared to process anything synthetic at all, and so
plates and forks out of the very same thing.
yeah. So and so these products we're really pushing to educate our customers and to replace them with better oils. Extra virgin olive oil is a good example. Clarified butter is a good example. Coconut oil is a good example of things that are less inflammatory to most humans. And once you introduce those into your menus, into your food operations, your customers start to get a little better. They're not having to consume this. I think if you've all probably had experiences where you go somewhere and you leave and you're like, I don't really know what's going on, but it's like, that wasn't right. More than likely, that's a reaction to some kind of blend of fry oil or something that's being used in the ingredient bank of that restaurant that you just don't know. That goes back to John's point of cooking at home. The only way to truly control your health is to understand what goes into everything. And that's challenging in its own way because everybody's super busy and it's really inconvenient to cook and to, not inconvenient, but a lot of people don't have the time to do it. So those decisions and how we're working to inform and educate is driven completely by my understanding of what my interpretation of this dominion over animals and plants and what we're really here for, and that's stewardship. Yeah.
How would you have it work?
Yeah.
It's not reality, but how would you say, this is what we tell a young person about the land, or this is what we tell our community about the land and the food and what we should be doing?
That we need to get back to repair number one, the soil, and John's conversation last week was about repairing the soil. Everything from the soil is sovereign and should be protected. And so instead of it being a sonic event, let's say Sonic Burger, for example, that type of delivery system should be for boxes of vegetables but how do you re-educate? It's about pay attention to the labor that's necessary to create good food. How do you get back to a system and more of an agrarian mindset of kids today? And I have teenagers, so I'm totally I've been talking to them in volumes about what to do here. And it goes, sometimes it'll stick. I'll hear them say some things that I'm like, maybe they are listening. I don't know, but it's trying to get them just to get their feet back on the ground and go see these operations, go see a farm, go see a slaughter operation, go see where you get reconnected to your foods, the origin of your food. I think Michael Pollan's an author, and he wrote a book called Omnivore's Dilemma that really says eat it if it is a plant, not if it's from a plant, right? So try to educate kids on what's really going on. I show them that graphic of, there's 10 companies that own every snack food in the world, right? So it's complex, and it might be an old-fashioned way of the world, but the agrarian way that we had before is really that was the truth and was the right path. I think that we can have a much more just food system by opening. There's a terminal farmers market down south by the airport here. And I'm not saying all that food is sourced properly or produced properly, but it's an open air market to where you can go and pick up pretty affordable. You can go get a box of squash for a pretty affordable price. But the availability of those types of farmers markets need to be on every corner. Like our accessibility to fresh food and to locally grown food can reignite the agricultural basis of this country that's necessary, and basically try to balance. Now, there's always going to be technology and how do we do this better? How do we do it faster? How do we do it, whatever. But there's that, I think that's the noise that you have to battle. You have to battle back to that there's really one way to do this, and that's with non-GMO seed and time. Anyway, I don't know if I answered that question at all, but that's, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Well, since you're in the restaurant.
Yeah.
I love the story that you're telling, because you have me call. And I just wonder what the restaurant group or whatever is doing about portion control. I feel like, okay, I was a child of the 50s, and my father, a World War II veteran, said, think of all the starving kids in China, clean your plate. And I used to be smart aleck and say, well, put it in a box and send it to mom.
Right.
I was like,
Yeah, no, yeah.
I've gotten better. But I feel like we in America, we eat so much. I mean, and when they put a big portion on the plate at a restaurant, I am habitually going to clear my
Yeah.
plate. And I think a lot of us are like that.
Yeah.
It was Albanians in my house.
Well, yeah. Well, I think you've touched on a few things. One is it's a programming that we all have gone through, whether it's back, right after World War II. My grandfather was a tank. He drove a tank for Patton, and he's a machinist, but he had a huge garden, and that's, John was talking about my bio earlier. They had a room that was so packed full of food because they didn't know if there was ever. Well, first of all, you didn't know if the world was going to end at that point. I mean, coming out of that, that type of. Well, that's true as well, but there was this. Anyway, portion control for me and what we do is about pricing, right? So we have to think through what's the best portion for the best price and the best profitability. That's the way I think about portion control. But in your point, restaurants most restaurants don't really have control of their portion, to be completely honest. I mean, so there's this, a lot of them do, but they don't. I think that consumer behavior has to change in so many ways. One of them is eating less meat. Me talking about this industrial food system, especially with meat production, is really, really, really destructive. We talked a lot about regenerative practices last week on this is a way to really kind of re-energize people to understand it, that these small regenerative farms can't feed the world, but they can feed the community. And so if we can replicate those farms in other places, now it also entails that the individual needs to kind of think honestly about their meat production, meat consumption. I'm not saying they need to stop meat 100%, but if we think about the early human in the sense of a hunter-gatherer, then they would hunt and have protein, have animal protein maybe once every now and then, So this was and I think that's a better way to think about it. And I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point, I'm trying to think in Atlanta where it's a good example of big portions, but I totally understand what you're saying. It's this, I think, perception is value in a lot of ways in a lot of restaurateurs' eyes. And so if they don't give a big portion, they think the customers are going to be like, what are we doing here? But if it's too expensive.
I was going to say, that example is an example of how complicated it is, and that part of the reason I think portions have grown so much is because our food is less nutrient.
Yeah.
Dense. So we need more calories to get the nutrients. And that has to do with our soil health. So it all ultimately comes back to the soil.
It does.
But I think that for this to change, it has to come from the consumer. More importantly, a lot of people a lot smarter than this than me believe the same thing. So as consumers, we've got to become good food evangelicals. We've got to educate ourselves and learn and not be afraid to step into a situation where somebody says, well, I want to be able to buy my chicken for $2 a pound. And they come back and they say, well, the regenerative farm, they farm chickens too. Yes,
no, it's a,
Super stressed, and we're eating all that stress.
yeah, they're super stressed and they're fed an incredibly terrible diet most of the time. You know, most of those cattle are pumped full of corn, and cows are not designed to eat corn in general. So, Alan, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wondered how you've changed your own diet over the years.
I'm not a perfect consumer by any means. But I shop at the local farmers market. But you know, having teenagers and trying to educate them and try to keep them somewhat fed has been a challenge.
Well, do you have any recommendations for us?
Well, I think that as I've aged, you know, and it's everybody. Here's the thing: everybody's an individual when it comes to their own health. And so, what might be a problem or something for me? I really recommend doing a blood test to understand any type of intolerances you might have, or any type of you know, we talked about inflammation. Anything that might trigger inflammation in your body is really important to get control of. And so it's a pretty simple test. You can do a blood or a stool test, and you know, there are integrative medicine companies, or your internal medicine guy's probably not going to have this test, but I would search those out. And number one, that's for me is the key for you understanding your own body. These synthetics have changed the population. I mean, if you think about the 50s and 60s, there were no gluten allergies, right? Yeah, you didn't know anybody that had major peanut allergies. You didn't see any of this what we see today, right? Synthetics are directly related to all of these issues because the body's trying to adapt. It's trying to figure out what's going on. It doesn't have any way to. So metabolically, we're hyper challenged. So that would be my number one recommendation. I think like high proteins, meaning like good eggs, good breads. You know, I buy all my bread locally. Not saying that it's not, but I trust that they use less processed flour. White, you know, breads you buy in a supermarket or that are in a plastic bag are all highly processed, and those components are super inflammatory. So I think finding what works for your body is super important. Yes, sir.
How do you, and I'm one of these people that's still hung up that we have to feed 300 million people.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks food is too high now, and
Yeah.
they're spending the highest percentage they've ever spent in their life.
Sure.
So how do you scale it at the end of the day, or how do you start messaging
Yeah.
people that food needs to be more expensive? In France, they spend a third of their income
Right.
on food.
Yeah.
In America, we spend 12%.
Right.
So
It's good. It's the challenge of the lifetime. Yeah.
the vast majority of people can't go have a metabolic test.
No, I get that. I get it. No, I get it. I think. Go.
It's kind of dovetail on that, is like you have, and how do you square it with, and I assume when you're meeting with lower socioeconomic areas where it's completely cost driven for
Sure.
to feed themselves, and like, how do you educate them and where there's lack of state investment in food deserts to bring that message to people in terms of like, how do we kind of feed everybody?
Yeah.
Sort of order.
It's incredibly challenging. There are no easy answers to it at all. And I think the scalability side of it is, you know, watching Will Harris's video last week, he's like, I'm not here to feed the world, but I am here to feed X number of people. And so replicating those types of farms and getting people that once were in farming back into farming and helping them understand how to change this. But unfortunately, I think the system's going to have to break and it will have to be rebuilt in order for.
Ways to provide incentives.
Well,
Like Walmart can help scale it.
You probably could, but again, we're going to be dealing with their profitability and all of their scalability and everything else, right? So if it's not on their agenda and if it's not going to be, you know, profitable, or, you know, these are really idealistic kind of views of the world, and unfortunately, not unfortunately, but fortunately, like I have this insight that I see that it can work, but it's going to take a lot of broken.
Why do you think that the medical field
Mm-hmm.
is not giving any real alarm or weight to, oh, yes, there's so many more of you with
Yeah,
this and that, and I think it's everything. I mean.
it is. I
So
think.